thank you everyone for coming today and joining us. I'm Helen Clarke. I'm one of the curators of the space at Design. And today we're in conversation with the artist who's responsible for the current exhibition, Andrea Thoma. So normally there would be video and sound in the space, but because we're having a conversation today, the video is switched off. But please, there's one more day left to visit the exhibition if you want to, if you haven't had a chance to look at it so far. So the way we thought we would conduct the conversation is that Andrea and I will be in conversation for about 15 minutes, and then we'd have a break, and then if people wanted to ask questions, that would be a good point to do that. And then we thought we'd maybe then go back to some of the topics that we wanted to cover and then have a second opportunity for questions, because I know some people have to come in and out, and then the questions are not all at the end in that case. So if we're all ready, thank you everyone so much for coming. So Andrea, really, when we were discussing the work yesterday, I thought it'd be interesting to hear some of your reflections about the differences between showing the work in here at Space at Design and the previous iterations of the exhibition that you've had at East Street Arts. I think it would be really interesting to get your reflections on the differences of showing your work in those two spaces. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that experience of those two spaces.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for the question. And I also wanted to say thank you everybody who is here and who supports this event. I think, first of all, I would like to say that the work in this exhibition is a completely different body of work, although it's of the same project. But one piece, and that is the video piece Baustelle, which means building site, construction site. And I decided to use this piece again because of the nature of the piece and how that is, from a conceptual level, how that sort of says it's an ongoing process. It's a project that is evolving as well, the different sites. Now, to answer your question about the site and the differences of the exhibition, I think, like one aspect of my work is very much, in particular the painting, is that it responds to architectural space that is in conversation with space, and in these spaces, the nature of the two spaces are very different. I mean, the exhibition, the first part of this project was an exhibition that was at the project space Patrick Studios of the East Street Arts organization, and that is a space that has natural light, has a window, has quite a high ceiling with an angle, so it's a very different feel. It was also different in terms of the paintings that were in there, but also the video pieces there. All three had sound, so there was a mix of a soundscape, which was intended, and also, I mean, obviously sound approaching each individual piece would be stronger, but it was that sense very much of an orchestration of different works, but I'm thinking back of the height of that ceiling and also the arrangement of the paintings. But I also had, for example, a video screen leaning on the floor, so I played with the floor, I played with the height, etc. Now this space, as you can see, doesn't have or has a natural window, natural light that has been covered. So there is no direct daylight really coming in. So here the question was, what do I do with the space? So it was, for me, it was first of all to come in when the previous show had been taken away, and just to see what the space does in its own right, and then to see how this could work. And then again, the nature of my painting is that I use bold colors. They are not quite hard edge, but quite hard edge paintings. So there is this notion that you have it all in one space and you also have it a bit in your face. So here I had to think how I would deal with this, and how also the video works, which you can't see at the moment, but they actually operate as windows as well. In particular, the piece, that is called Pace Kofu, which is a mountain view, which is looped. It's only 16 seconds, and it's that impossibility of grasping the image of a mountain. But it's that image of a mountain, and you see natural light, you see daylight, so it's bringing daylight in through the artifact of the video. Similarly with the other video, it's bringing that in.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I found interesting in our conversation as well was the parallel that you brought as well with the exhibition as a construction site, because one of the videos contains some observations, some distance observation of construction on a building site, doesn't it? And you kind of drew that parallel of constructing the space within the gallery in your work, which I think is really interesting.
Absolutely, and I mean we can't see it at the moment, but you would have the soundscape of the construction site, and that would also, I think, be like a counterpoint to the silence of the paintings or the photographs, but it would also, the sound would actually fill the space in a different way. In a much more physical way. So it was also, it's also that give and take of that, and then it's construction as an exhibition, but also a painting being constructed. They're different modes. There's also that aspect of montage within video itself. But then it's also, I mean, in that video we have a workman, we have what they wear, which sort of is echoed in some of the paintings, some of the colors. It's also there is that aspect of different layers of, again, like, I mean, we here the whole exhibition is called Color Folds too. So the folded space there, it's looking through curtains, through lace curtains at a building site. Again, the sort of ornamentation in the curtains creates links with the paintings. Now, sometimes people have said, well, when do these decisions happen? And it's not that I made the site because of the paintings or the paintings because of the video, but those are parallel activities, and there are certain ideas that take different formats in different methods.
Yeah, that's interesting, I think, and also connects to another thing that I wanted to ask you about, which was the process of the making in the making, and the process of the research, and how those two things work together for you. We've got some work in the foyer, you've put some work in the vitrines that sort of illustrates that process of thinking and reading for you. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where that kind of thinking, reading, writing, research process comes in that.
I think it's a difficult question, and I think it's a difficult question for anybody who works as an artist and a researcher,
academic. Yeah,
and
definitely.
where these things come together. And I think it's different for everybody, and also at different times. So there's a time of reading, there's a time of writing, there's a time of making. But I was also thinking today, I was looking again at I thought, which were the books that I put in the vitrines, because that was not my initial idea to use the vitrines, but you prompted me to use them as well. And I said afterwards, I'm glad that you asked me, because it was actually, it was rewarding to think about this. And obviously I have lots of books, and I read lots of books, and I write about lots of things, but then some of these books, they are about specific things that come into the work. I think there are certain things that even go back to my PhD, which is very much the idea of intermediality that comes in, sort of art and architecture. Then also, I mean, there's one book in there by Hito Style, that the notion of the image and how we see an image, or the poor image, and all, like this whole work is about perception. And also, I think there's a continuation of that idea of, relations between abstraction and a more indexical world, which is photographic or filmic. Now, I think theory, because you asked about the question of research and theory, I think on the one hand, research is also through making art. That is a form of researching, of testing things, of also developing a body of work. But it's also how certain concepts then and that's the reading as well, and the researching helped me think about my work differently. And here it's, for example, the fold. I mean, the fold has been influential for a lot of artists in architecture, in many different disciplines. And I'm not a philosopher, so it's not that thing of, you know, where I would say I would want to make a talk about philosophy. But the notion of the fold, and Deleuze has mentioned that as well, is obviously there is something quite practical where you can fold a piece of a garment, or you can have the illusion of a fold within two-dimensional painting. But a fold is also a change of direction, and I think that's really fascinating. You know, I you know, in mathematics, again, you know, it's when a line has a direction and then it changes, it folds, and that obviously conceptually can lead to a lot of things. And then also this folding, I mean, as much as the fold for me also relates to three-dimensionality, although those paintings are flat, and I have some colleagues here who are sculptors, you know, like, but it relates to the idea of the three-dimensional. And also what I find also fascinating with a fold is when you fold a piece of garment, that obviously something that is far away, you can bring that into proximity.
Yeah, and something that's hidden can be revealed and vice versa.
Absolutely, yeah.
So would it be fair to say that there's maybe a process of folding between the research and the reading and the actual practical work?
That as well.
Yeah.
That as well. I think it's that, and then there's also the folding between the different methods. Like, as I said before, Baustelle has, you know, there is that sense of layering, there is a sense of color and of movement, which is picked up in the paintings in a very different format. There is also going back to perception and to seeing the smaller photographs. I call them color stills, because they're about machinic seeing, and they're about you know, like stills from using the you know, a smartphone camera quickly to sort of record more or less just movement, and then going back to, you know, like selecting some of those stills. So it's also a folding between something that is much more a physical process in painting, the painting starting with drawings that are a form of performance, where I actually draw, I perform in the space, and then the charcoal hits the canvas and it goes back and forth. So it's very much it's relation with the body, whereas here it's the body holding the smartphone, but it's very much whatever that smartphone lens picks up and how it picks up the colors.
I think we should come back to that discussion about the performance and the composition, because I think that's you talked about sort of musical compositions, or even a composition akin to dance or in the use of space. I think we should come back to that, because that's really important, isn't it? But I wonder, does anyone have any thoughts or questions, so we don't have to leave the thoughts or questions to the end? If anyone wants to interject, then please do. If not, we're happy to keep on talking. Shall we carry on? Yeah. So I don't know if you want to say a bit more about that, Andrea, about the that idea of the performance, or the composition, because you talked about musical notes in relation to the arrangement of the height of the.
I think performance in this exhibition, performance comes into in different aspects. One is in the paintings, as I said, you know, the way I start them. Yeah. So it's not, you know, it's not that I look at a scene which I might reproduce or represent, but it comes out of that performance. Now, you know, when you think of gesture, abstract expressionism, it's not that quite either, because there might be first something that relates between actually a three-dimensional space and a two-dimensional, but then afterwards there is a process of selection, reflection. So it's not the immediacy, the emotional immediacy of abstract expressionism, for example.
No.
But then there is performance also in some of in the video pieces. The performance is, well, you know, like, I mean, when you see the the workmen at the building site, it is like a performance. It's like a choreography. However, it's the serendipity of found footage, like you would find footage with a camera. But filming that is really the way they move up and down the ladder, the way they will do different things, the way they're very absorbed in this is a performance.
Yeah, it's a choreography.
It's a choreography.
The everyday
It also
movements.
relates to work, and I mean, Haroon Farocki has done this whole body of work of 1-minute films of people at work. You know, like, I mean, this is not based on that idea, but there are links with things like that.
Yeah.
There is the performance in setting something up with these color stills, and then there is also that, in this particular space, when I actually installed the work, there is the idea of how each individual work that works for itself changes because it's next to these other things. So for me, the whole thing is like a choreography, if you want.
Yes, the rhythm that you've established.
With the different, obviously color and what color does, color as abstraction, color as photographic image and whatsoever, but also, and then again, sound and how sound fills the space as well.
Did you want to talk a bit more about the selection process of the objects in the vitrines and how, because obviously there's a selection process in the display of the work, isn't there, in the making of the work, but what was the editing or selection process?
Okay, first when you asked me to put things in the vitrine, I thought, oh, this is a lot. What do I do? And there was also that very much a consciousness now talking about performances. Putting things in a vitrine like this in an exhibition becomes also a performance. A performance of reading, a performance of scholarship,
work.
A performance of some kind of knowledge. It's a staging.
Yes.
I had to go past that sort of uneasiness of staging, because the staging always takes away from a reality as well. It might elevate some books and leaves out others, etc.
Yeah, I suppose for me though, the reason that I asked was to do with making visible that process of research that might not otherwise be visible to a visitor. Or
well, perhaps I should start with the images that are in the vitrines as one enters the building, because those images, they are really, some of them are photographs that some of them are photographs of stages of the paintings, some of them are images of the notebooks. So that is really sort of to provide snippets of all the periphery of what research is, because research is not finished artwork. For me, it's not, but it's very much the whole process.
The process.
And also, and that's why I like the building site in here as well. It's ongoing, It's I think for anybody who has an exhibition, you already think not necessarily of what you make, but it's just. It's a point in something that is progressional, or cyclic, or whatever.
In a point in a dialogue, I suppose. So, what would you say you've learned from, particularly having the exhibition here? What are the things that you've taken away from this experience in this space that might go back into the work or inform future work or projects?
I think what was really interesting was to use the vitrines as something that normally could also happen through journal articles or through other formats where one actually reflects on one's research, and I've done that. So that's interesting. It's also obviously a challenge when you have an exhibition in the institution where you work and where you teach, so you feel very self-conscious. But I think it was also very interesting to look at this space, because every space has its challenges. And I was actually very intrigued by what the works do in this space. So I think what I learned is that, and it was also conversations with people.
Yeah, I think the context is interesting, isn't it? having the gallery space in the School of Design, where we have this mixture of really technical programs. For example, you know, right opposite the gallery here we have the Yorkshire Fashion Archive, and then on the left we've got all that machinery and all the, you know, the labs and the testing labs. And so I think it's just an interesting context, isn't it? And I know you've talked with some people in the school who are maybe less familiar with abstract work in particular, or even feeling necessarily comfortable in a gallery space, which in itself I think is quite an interesting context, isn't it, for us to have this space and to have those conversations.
And what you just said about the space, that's why, again, I'm going back to the building side, because I think the building side video is actually really important for the exhibition, because it also changed for me that silence that you normally have unless you have sound works in a gallery.
Yeah, which can be really intimidating, can't it?
Exactly, and sometimes people came in and they were not sure if the banging that they heard was somewhere in the building, some building works going on, and then they realized, no, it's actually part of the exhibition. And I think, yes, I think that's, I enjoyed that, and I'm also going back, you know, like, because the title of the exhibition has there also movement between minor and major modes, which obviously refers to Deleuze and Guattari, but it's also Oichishika talked about that as well. You know, like about, you know, like the major modes of the establishment, of the museums, of the galleries, and minor modes as referring more to the local, sometimes referring in terms of language to dialect, referring to minor things. And I think that's also what really comes in for me with that sound, or with the video piece of the mountain, where it's not a grand film, but it's actually shaky camera footage, and it's sort of trying to grasp that mountain, or with images like this, which they are not big, huge photographs, but they're just little snippets of something that I would say anybody can take. They can be put there, they're minor modes. What is painting? Is that a major mode? Well, it's just throwing this in as to the discussion of how we consume images, what images are, and if some media are more respected than others.
Yeah, and do you think that abstraction has more, is there more of a challenge for viewers to?
That's a difficult one.
Well, we talked about different cultural contexts, didn't we, in relation to that question.
I mean, I had questions in conversations, and I was saying at some point, well, when you hear a piece of music, you just listen. So one could say, well, similarly with painting, or with seeing form and color, you might just want to look. I think any artifact is an abstraction, even the depiction of something that is recognizable. So abstraction is perhaps not the right term, but I think it's really about perception, and about seeing what those images do and how they function. And I find it's also obviously interesting, and that was part of my PhD, to see what a photograph does next to a painting. That was very much part of it. Like, there is a photograph of a building that is actually by Oskar Niemeyer, which is next to a painting, and it's not that one illustrates the other, but there are commonalities of what happens, and not just in terms of color and form, but they're very different ways of putting it out there. I think probably abstraction is something that, like with experimental music, the more you see it and you look at it, the more you might be open towards it.
Yeah, and that's something you've explored in some of the bookworks that you've included in the vitrines, isn't it? The imaginary landscapes are sort of playing on that use of photography and abstraction as well, which I think is it's obviously something that is part of a longer term part of your work, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, some of the bookwork is also it's another format, but it also allows. It's another time frame, and it's again another visual method. But everything, like I was just, before this talk, I was looking again at what I had put in those vitrines, and I was reading again, the page that I had open there, is that the writer about Oiticica was saying that Oiticica had read a lot of Bergson, Henry Bergson, and I use Bergson a lot in my PhD about duration and multiplicity of duration. So you could say these different formats have different times, but they all come together in one time.
Yes.
Which is through this laying. And the bookwork obviously has a very interesting way of using time.
Yeah. Thank you. Really insightful.